January 1943. Over Western Europe, dawn arrives without color. The sky is sealed shut by heavy cloud, a dense ceiling of gray stretching from horizon to horizon. Cold air vibrates with the distant hum of engines, unseen but unmistakable. Below the clouds, German cities, rail yards, and factories lie concealed, wrapped in what planners once believed was protection. For years, cloud cover had been an ally of defense, a natural curtain against precision bombing. On this morning, that belief begins to fracture. This moment matters because air power had become the central battlefield of ideology and industry. By 1943, the Third Reich was locked in a total war it could no longer localize or contain. The skies above Europe were no longer empty corridors. They were contested domains where science, production, and doctrine collided. German generals had built their air defense strategy on assumptions forged in the 1930s. Bombers needed clear skies, visual identification, and daylight visibility to strike with accuracy. Clouds were supposed to mean safety. What they underestimated was not courage or numbers, but a system. German high command expected American bombing to resemble British night raids, area bombing, limited precision, heavy losses. They believed that without clear visibility, American formations would either turn back or scatter their payloads harmlessly across fields and forests. Weather briefings were once reassuring documents. Thick cloud meant delayed operations, inaccurate strikes, or mission cancellations. Instead, they began receiving reports that defied doctrine. Bombs were falling directly on rail junctions, ball-bearing plants, oil refineries, through cloud layers that should have made precision impossible. The shock was not merely tactical, it was conceptual. U.S. Army Air Force's doctrine centered on daylight precision bombing, a philosophy rooted in industrial confidence. The Americans believed war could be shortened by destroying production, not cities alone. To do that, they invested heavily in technology. At the center of this transformation was a small, humming instrument housed inside bomber fuselages, airborne radar. By late 1942 and early 1943, American bombers were increasingly equipped with H-2X radar, derived from the British H-2S system. Crews called it Mickey. It allowed navigators to identify coastlines, rivers, rail hubs, and industrial zones through cloud, darkness, and smoke. Targets appeared as glowing shapes on circular screens, abstract but reliable. The bomb aimer no longer depended solely on sight. Geometry and radio waves replaced clear skies. German intelligence intercepts and post-raid damage assessments confirmed the pattern. According to Luftwaffe records, bombing accuracy during overcast conditions was improving instead of degrading. In some cases, strikes through cloud were nearly as concentrated as those on clear days. General der Flieger Adolf Galland later acknowledged that American technological adaptation was faster than expected, noting that defenses designed for one kind of war were being bypassed by another. The emotional contrast for German commanders was stark. They had been taught that German engineering was unmatched, that Allied industry was inefficient, that democracy could not sustain prolonged technological competition. Yet here was evidence to the contrary. Mass-produced bombers, flying in tight formation, guided by invisible signals, striking precisely through weather that should have rendered them blind. The clouds, once symbols of concealment, had become meaningless. Factories told the story more clearly than reports. At Schweinfurt, ball-bearing production, critical for tanks, aircraft, and vehicles, was repeatedly disrupted despite heavy cloud cover. At Bremen and Kassel, industrial targets were hit with unnerving regularity. Bomb craters appeared not randomly, but in patterns that matched blueprints. For German generals trained to see war as a test of will and maneuver, this was a confrontation with something colder, arithmetic. American abundance was not merely material, it was systemic. Radar sets, training programs, replacement crews, spare aircraft, losses were absorbed and replaced at a rate German planners could not match. One recurring sound came to symbolize this imbalance, the steady drone of bomber engines, audible even when the aircraft themselves were hidden. The sound arrived on schedule, indifferent to weather, flak, or expectation. It was not dramatic, it was inevitable. Documents from the German Armaments Ministry reveal growing alarm by mid-1943. Albert Speer later wrote that the bombing campaign exposed structural weaknesses in German production and dispersal efforts. Even when factories were camouflaged or moved, the bombers found them again. Clouds no longer delayed destruction, they merely muffled its arrival. For some German officers, this realization marked a turning point. The war was no longer about superior tactics or heroic resistance. It was about capacity, about who could integrate science, industry, and logistics into a single, relentless force. American bombers flying through cloud represented more than technological innovation. They embodied a society capable of organizing freedom into function, debate into production, and choice into scale. The symbolic object remains the cloud itself. Once trusted, once protective, it had failed. What covered the ground no longer concealed it. The cloud became a metaphor for the illusions that had sustained early confidence, beliefs in invulnerability, in superiority, and the limits of the enemy. When bombs fell through it with precision, those illusions dissolved. By 1944, German air defenses adapted, but the imbalance remained. Radar-guided bombing, escort fighters, and overwhelming numbers pressed the campaign forward. The clouds continued to gather over Europe, but they no longer offered comfort. They only delayed the moment of impact by seconds. In the end, this experience revealed a larger truth about the war and the world it shaped. Freedom, when organized, could produce abundance without chaos. Democracy, when threatened, could mobilize science without surrendering principle. The bombs that fell through cloud were not just weapons, they were messages. They declared that modern war would be decided not by secrecy alone, but by openness turned into strength. And in that gray-covered sky, German generals saw not just bombers, but the future arriving, whether they could see it or not.